out, here they are. I could begin to play skeptic. Well, how do I know those are your car keys? How do I know I'm not experiencing an illusion right now? I'm in the Matrix. How do I know, right? We can play those things. But that's epistemology. If somebody, my friend, says, hey, is there radiation in the house? Let me take a look. I don't see any, right? We're going to talk a little about that later. Metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. What's ethics?
Right and wrong.
Right and wrong. Study right and wrong. You can get more sophisticated, but that's good enough for us right now. Study of right and wrong. Are you an ethical person, or are you not? We talk about those kinds of things. What's the nature of right and wrong? What makes an action right or wrong? What about attitudes? And so, metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics, everybody has one. You have a metaphysical view. You have an epistemology. I don't know about you, but when I was like in third or fourth grade, there was always that kid. It's usually a guy because their boys are weird. Right? You know, I speak from experience. But there's always that kid, you know, that knows everything, right? He comes to school and he'll say something like, "Your epidermis is showing," and every guy immediately goes, "What?" Right? It's not that. Epidermis, but this kid's learned a new word, right? What's your epidermis? Your skin, right? Everybody's like, oh, yeah, I know skin. Skin's always with me, it's on me, I can't get away from it. You just told me it's a new professional sounding word. That's the same thing with epistemology. You're living with one. It's like the skin on you. So you have it. So now you know a new word. You didn't know that before. Epistemology. And so we got metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. And Christianity has a metaphysical system, has an epistemology, and has ethics involved. Many times we focus on the ethics, right? Hey, don't murder. That's one. That's an ethical statement. And so and there are others. There are even more important ones than that, Jesus told us. So what happens when we have a worldview with metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics? I like things in threes. You'll notice that if you pay close attention. You usually have a triangle on the board with this. What happens when worldview A, with its metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics, comes into conflict with worldview B, with its metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics? We've got two different worldviews. They could be religious in nature, they might not be, but they're worldviews, and they know that they disagree. What happens? I think at least three things happen or ought to happen when that comes about. And again, here's another set of three. We engage in proof, defense, and offense. We engage in attempting to prove our worldview. And by proof, I don't mean some sort of axiomatic geometrical certainty. It can be as simple as saying, here's some evidence for what I affirm or I believe. Here's A, B, C, D, here's the evidence for my worldview. That's proof. We have to defend them. We go on the defense. Because somebody's going to say, hey, of all those reasons, they don't make a lot of sense to me. I've got an objection to what you believe. And so now we need to defend our worldview against objections that might be lodged against it. So we engage in proof, we give reasons, we have to defend against objections, and then we get to do a third thing, namely to go on the offense. And going on the offense has nothing to do with being offensive. Not about being a jerk for Jesus, I'm going to save you just by pounding you in the head with all these facts. But going on the offensive is this, philosophically. Not only do I get questions about my Christian faith, I get to ask questions about your worldview. Right? And that could be done with, and it should be done with the utmost kindness and respect. It could be done with tears in your eyes. But we engage in actually critically probing, and I'm not talking about critically probing the structure and the belief system of unbelief. We're going to talk about naturalism. Proof, defense, and offense. This is nothing new to you. Again, you might think, wow, I got to do these three things. I don't know if I can do this. You've done it. I'm going to guess you've done it. Most of you have probably engaged in proof, defense, and offense. If you've ever engaged in any discussion like this, hey, what do you think is the best pizza place in Phoenix? Let's ask that question. Anybody want to say what they think the best Phoenix is? Somebody want to engage with me? Yes. Tell me again. Spinatos. I've heard it, never been there. Okay, so give me a reason or two why Spinatos is the best pizza place in Phoenix.
Basically, they don't use soy in their crust or their sauce, so I can eat it.
Okay, no soy in the sauce. Okay, right. Now what if I were to also say to you, well, I have an objection. I think it's too expensive at Spinatos. There we go. We got an answer, right? She just defended Spinatos. We got proof and defense. We got an apologist for Spinatos. What if I all of a sudden say, what's your name by the way? I'm sorry.
Maria.
Maria. You know, Spinatos is not the best pizza place in town. The best pizza place in town is Little Caesars. No. I was thinking I was picking the worst pizza place. And you people, I thought you were Christians. I don't know what's going on here. This is great. $5, okay. Your college. So, Maria, right? Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. I just blanked. Little Caesars is the best pizza. What do you guys say to that?
If you like things with unhealthy amounts of grease.
Ooh, boom. You have too much grease in your ingredients, right? She went on the offense, and she wasn't offensive. She was very kind when she did that. She has a mask out, but I know there's a smile beneath there. You know, she's like, you're going to eat that stuff and die. That's good, right? So that's an apologetics for pizza. You've done this. You've probably done this with what's the best movie, what's the best comedy. We won't go through all those permutations because that would take us really far astray. But proof, defense, and offense, we're doing that with Christianity. And we're doing that with other people's worldviews we come in contact with. We're going to talk about that as we go along. I think there are at least 5 tests. Now here's where I couldn't get everything into 3. 5 tests for a worldview. If I'm looking at a worldview, my own and someone else's, what kind of tests how would I know if it's true? And so I think there's at least 5 tests. Number 1, the test of consistency. Do the beliefs hold together in a logical manner or are they illogical? Are there contradictions? Contradictions are always an indicator of that something is wrong someplace and it's false. You need to somehow resolve that contradiction. So consistency is the first one. The second one is coherence. Does the worldview cohere together? Slightly different than consistency. Somebody might say things like this. I think all that exists is matter. Nothing except, physics and chemistry. That's it. And then you'll meet him next time and they'll say something about, but in my soul, I know this is true. I'm like, wait a second, you said that all that exists was matter. Now you're talking about the soul? Well, yeah, I believe that an immaterial soul. Just matter, immaterial soul. That's a contradiction. Oh, right? Coherence is slightly different. Somebody might say, all I believe that exists is matter, and I also hold to something called objective morality. There's an objective right or wrong. I'm going to make the case, both tonight a little bit and week 3, that materialist understanding and naturalistic understanding, that doesn't cohere very well. It doesn't fit. Think about coherence as fittedness. Does it fit? It's like putting on a pair of pants like this does not fit. That's always a problem. So consistency, coherence, explanation. Does your worldview explain things? Does it explain the world? Does it explain phenomena? We're going to look at some phenomena with a big word. We're going to look at some stuff that almost everybody believes and ask which worldview makes it better, can explain it better. Evidence. Does the worldview have evidence? Now this can be tricky because your worldview can affect what you accept as evidence. Right? We need to be careful of that. But evidence should be there. Hey, I think there's evidence for Christian theism. There's evidence for Christianity. Let me tell you some of the evidence. And now there's the fifth test is what I call the existential test. It sounds really deep and wild. Existential basically means this: can you live with it? Can you live with it? I've met people, I mean, I got a conversation years ago, when I was at the U of A studying. It was a crazy conversation. Here I was, a Christian. There was, I think it was a Hare Krishna. They had the orange things on it. And there was a person over here that was just a skeptic. So we got this three-way conversation going on about religion and philosophy, just standing out there, in the quad area. And it was interesting because sometimes the Hare Krishna I would be like, well, no, you're wrong. And then other times it'd be like, he would say something and the atheist and I would go, no, you're wrong. And then at times they'd both look at me and say, no, you're completely nuts, right? And so it was one of those conversations. And so this guy the skeptic was saying, I'm not even sure I exist. Right? He'd learned enough in philosophy class, maybe he'd read some Descartes, who he is. I'm not sure I exist. Maybe I'm being deceived by an evil demon right now. And I said to him, you can say that. And that's fun to say, right? Because it sort of stops the conversation. Because I don't know I exist, then I don't even know you exist. I don't know what you're saying is true. Your Jesus thing can't be true. He didn't rise from the dead, because who knows, right? I don't even know if I exist. I said, but when you get up tomorrow morning, and you go to get your cereal, you're going to open your door there, you're going to pull your cereal out, and you're not going to wonder, am I really existing? You're not going to live that way, and you know that. You're not going to actually be consistent. And what is it we call somebody who says one thing and lives a different way?
Hypocrite.
Hypocrite, right? You can be a philosophical hypocrite. And Christians get called that, right? Because we hold to a very high standard in our ethics, right? Jesus said, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect in Matthew 5:48. And so we don't live up to that, so there's always a bit of hypocrisy in our ethical system, in our own lives. But other philosophical, you can have hypocrites, atheistic hypocrites, philosophically. I want you to be aware of that. So what I'm engaging is that when we compare these worldviews, it's often helpful to recognize I'm interacting with another worldview, to compare worldviews. Sometimes people want to say something like, no, I'm just a skeptic. I don't have a worldview. Yes, you do. You do. Let's put them both on the table. Now, I'll answer your questions, but I want to know where you're coming from, too. You have to answer questions, too. Sometimes people want to say, no, I just want to ask questions. I just want to play the skeptic. I just want to keep peppering you with stuff, make you justify what you're doing. And I was like, no, let's do a comparative approach, what we need to do. So I want to compare Christian theism, what I'm going to call Christianity, Christian theism. It's a theism, means belief in God, and it's Christian theism. It's the triune God. I want to compare Christian theism to naturalism as a philosophical worldview. I want to make two quick caveats. There are more worldviews than naturalism. There's more stuff out there than atheism. I think we're going to find more and more we're going to run up against alternative spiritualities. I think atheism is ultimately bankrupt, both philosophically and at a personal level. And so a lot of people, I don't want that. I'm not sure I want that Jesus thing. And so give me some other offering of alternative spirituality. I think we're going to run into more of that. I'm amazed at how many times I run into witches, at GCC. Yeah, I interact with them quite a bit, the witch. And so I think we're going to run into more. So we're not dealing with everything. So I picked naturalism, because naturalism is still a major force in our colleges, higher education, and in our culture. So I'm not just picking out something that's not an issue. It's a major issue. It's sort of how higher education, how much the sciences are done in terms of naturalism. What is naturalism? You want to give me a sort of quick definition? I've been using that phrase. I don't want to point it out. He's going to say something. Yeah, when you touch, see, feel, hear, smell, these five senses. Yeah. What'd you say?
Oh, I'm trying to differentiate between the different religions. We studied them in school.
Okay, cool. Did you have your hand up?
No, I just I think you can observe.
Then you can observe, okay. But we observe things as Christians, right? I'm not opposed to that. Let me give you a couple definitions by James Anderson writes, naturalism asserts that all of reality, including us, consists at bottom of nothing more than fundamental physical particles and forces operating according to the laws of physics. There's nothing but matter and motion. Or here is actually a naturalist. Kai Nielsen was a famous atheist in the 20th century. He said, naturalism denies that there are any spiritual or supernatural realities transcendent to the world. He says this, it is the view that anything that exists is ultimately composed of physical elements. And obviously we're going to disagree with that as Christians, right? There is more than the physical. There is something in the spiritual. There's a Holy Spirit. There's angels. There's demons. There's God, what Christian theism claims. And he's not material in nature. And so our series tonight is going to be the proof. We're going to be reasons to consider the existence of God as rational. Defense, next week, is the problem of evil. We're going to defend against that objection. And week 3 is to go on the offense and challenge naturalism. So that's the structure of the 3 talks real quickly. All right, for proof, presenting the positive evidence and reason for God's existence. Just give you the evidence, right? We need to stop and make sure we understand what we're asking, right? Otherwise, we may get into weird debates that don't take us anywhere. I think with this, I want to also mention that I don't think the proof requires certainty. And proof is not the same thing as persuasion. I might present a masterful argument for something, like the best pizza. And somebody might just say, I don't like the argument. I do not want to accept that. But my premises are, and they say, yep, I can't refute you, but I'm not going to accept it. I will not be persuaded. Every once in a while, there are atheists that come out and say things like that. Thomas Nagel is a contemporary philosopher right now. He's an atheist. He's written a number of books. And he says this. He says, you know, it sort of bothers me sometimes that I have some really smart friends. He's a professional philosopher. I have really smart friends who believe in God. It makes me wonder if there's something to the case. But I look at what I believe and I say, I don't want to believe he exists. He comes out and says it. And not that he thinks the evidence is good, because he's going to say, I don't think the arguments are good and whatnot. He says, but even if it was, I don't want him to exist. Because it would make a claim on my life. So proof in the evidence we're talking about is not the same as persuasion. You might talk to somebody who's like, man, I used those arguments that guy said, and he said some things that made sense to me. I used them with my friend, and then he said, Doesn't mean the argument wasn't good. There may be some other things going on. I think we also know that there are spiritual components going on as Christians. Here's the key point I want to get across for this point. The nature of the object of knowledge determines the kind of evidence and reasons we can expect. I'm going to read that again. The nature of the object of knowledge, that's a fancy way of saying what I'm trying to know, determines the kind of evidence and reasons we can expect. And this is where I started mentioning earlier. How would I go about proving the answer? Hey, is there a bag of chips in the house? And I mentioned I'd go look at them. Is there radiation in the house? Right? I can't just go look for that. Because my friend said, hey, is there a bag of chips in the house? And he's at his house, and I'd say, yeah, I can actually take a picture. You know, I can take a picture of my bag of chips and show you inside the bag of chips and send it to you. Oh, okay. Yeah, you got a bag of chips. Radiation. Where am I going to put my camera? Now, there is a tool I could use, right? What's the tool called? Geiger counter, right? It's always in the movies. That radiation. I mean, somebody's going to turn into a Spider-Man or something. So yeah, so is there a bag of chips in the house? Is there radiation in the house? Is there love in the house? Well, my Geiger counter. Now, if I had a device that showed love, like he's in love. Is there logic in the house? Yeah. No one's going to take a picture of logic, right? The object of knowledge determines what kind of evidence I would accept. I would accept the evidence of a picture of for some, yeah, there's a bag of chips. You bring in bags, I got bags. I'm going to say, okay, I got my bags of chips. I'm bringing them to the party because you always don't bring anything. Bring bags of chips. I got them. Okay, I accept that as proof. That's good for me. It's good evidence. Are you bringing love? Yeah, I'm bringing love. How do I know? Right? How would I know? What kind of evidence would I need for that? I certainly couldn't find a picture that would maybe prove it. So now we come to God. God as an object of knowledge. How would I know if there's a God? Well, maybe I just take a picture. God, you know. And if somebody were to tell you, I will only accept empirical evidence for God, sometimes hear that. Give me the scientific proof that God exists. And I think what they're asking for is maybe a picture or something. I think there is scientific things we can say, but I mean, the idea is that the object of knowledge determines what kind of evidence I should expect would be provided. And here's what's intriguing. We have to not forget this as Christians, our own worldview. Don't forget this. God, the Christian God, is not like anything else in existence. See, our theology that we learn has to inform our apologetics. You can't forget that when we do apologetics. There's nothing else like him. See, the skeptic will sometimes say things like, the view of God is sort of like belief in the Loch Ness Monster. There's always some vague picture of Nessie to you. Or maybe God is like fairies. Sometimes people say, you believe in a sky fairy. A sky fairy from the Bronze Age. Or maybe this one, it's sort of like belief in the flying spaghetti monster. You ever heard that one? Ever heard of flying spaghetti monster?
Yeah.
Been touched by his noodly appendage, say something? You know what those who believe in the flying spaghetti monster are? What they call themselves? And when skeptics talk like that, the flying spaghetti monster is fun, right? It's a fun thing, and it's meant to parody what we believe. Well, I believe in the flying spaghetti monster, which everybody knows is foolish, and you believe in God, which everybody should know is foolish. That's how it's supposed to function, right? They put the colanders on their head, Pastafarians, and they get their DMV picture taken with that. What these skeptics often fail to recognize is that the God of the Bible is a fundamentally different kind of being than Santa Claus, the Yeti, Nessie, or the flying spaghetti monster. And therefore, the way in which one proves God's existence must be fundamentally different too. I think that's a key point. And so God's nature, that was God's nature. God's nature is completely unique as an object of knowledge. We need to take into account. Also, the significance of the object of knowledge. The significance of God, if he exists, is powerful. Think about the Loch Ness Monster. Let's say they all of a sudden caught the Loch Ness Monster. Or let's say I listened the other night, probably a month ago with my daughter, we were traveling late at night, one of these weird shows, Coast to Coast. Do you ever listen to this? And they had a Bigfoot hunter on. And it got crazy, nuts. And listen to this. Like this guy, he's in Arkansas, so he's got the southern twang. And it just doesn't sound good. There are British accents that you sound smart if you have a British accent. Sometimes in Arkansas, I don't know. And so he's talking about how he wants to bring a bunch of people down, we're going to catch ourselves a Bigfoot. And he's like, we're going to catch ourselves a Bigfoot, we're going to get one. And so he's just like, but they bring in this other caller, an expert on Bigfoot. And he says, no, you shouldn't do that because that would hurt them and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, this is weird. And he says, I live amongst them. I'm like, what? He said, yeah, I live amongst them. I've been living amongst the Bigfoot for 10 years. They talk to me. They speak English. I'm looking at my daughter. This is great. This is nuts. And then they play a section of a Bigfoot talking. Right after break, we're going to hear Bigfoot talking. We're going to stay in the car for this. But let's say we did catch Bigfoot. Let's say in Arkansas they bagged him. They bagged Bigfoot. Little significance hangs on Bigfoot's existence. Let's be honest. There would be some intriguing media coverage for a few weeks. It would dominate the media coverage, right? 2 years later, we're on to other things. There would be a select group of people that would be interested in the scientists, and they'd be wanting to do things, and people say, let's cut it open. No, let's not. They would be interested. It'd be significant for their life. They might revolve their lives around it, like this guy who lives with Bigfoot. I don't know what he's living with. But it would be little significance for the rest of our lives. Not so with God. If the God that I'm talking about is defined by the Bible exists, it has meaning and significance for everything in life. Not just the nature of the object, but the significance of it. The question about the existence of God, one philosopher wrote, likewise, is not just a question about whether one more thing exists in the inventory of reality, like Bigfoot. It's a question about the ultimate context for everything else. The theist and the atheist should see everything differently. Everything. Part of this is what discipleship is about. I'm learning to follow Jesus, and I'm learning to get his view on everything out there. Relationships, money, my life, all the things that we engage in and hear about and from the preached word on Sundays or in discipleship groups, all that discipleship, about learning how to live. What does Jesus have to say about sexual ethics? What does he have to say about the realm of history? What does he have to say about how I engage with people, the poor, how I engage with politics? Everything is affected by the existence of God or the non-existence. So the nature of God and his significance make this a unique question. The Christian God is completely unique. He transcends both space and time. The flying spaghetti monster doesn't. God created both space and time. He's an infinite being. He's what philosophers will call a necessary being. He exists necessarily. When Paul was in Athens, we won't read this section, but he uses this phraseology in Acts 17, verse 29, as he's looking at all their temples. For them, they're looking at these temples made out of stone and silver and gold. And he said this, we ought not to think that the divine nature is like, and then he goes on to talk about what he sees. It's not like that. It's not like the temple of Zeus. It ain't like that. And then Paul right here would say, we ought not to think that God, the biblical God, is like the Loch Ness Monster, the Flying Spaghetti Monster, Thor, or Odin. So in light of the radical nature and significance of God's existence, how do we go about proving or demonstrating this to be true? In light of all, okay, you've set up everything now, explain it. You have 15, 20 minutes left. Explain how we do this. James Anderson writes this, I think it's very helpful. So how can God's existence be proven? Here's my answer in a nutshell, he says, and I agree with him. Even though God cannot be directly perceived like ordinary things, like a bag of chips, within the universe, it turns out that we cannot make sense of the ordinary things we do perceive and the universe as a whole unless God exists. In short, only a worldview centered on a transcendent, perfect, personal creator can make rational sense of the very things we take for granted all the time. That unless you affirm and hold to the existence of God, the rest of reality doesn't make sense. So the claim is that other worldviews will have incoherence and contradictions within them. You won't be able to live them out consistently. They won't explain as well, and there will not be the same evidential basis for them. So unless God exists, you can't explain the things that we do see and observe. Now James Anderson lists out 6 features that he thinks God best explains. I'm going to put his list down to 3. He wrote an essay as well, besides his book, called The Inescapability of God's Existence, which is online. A nice little essay where he walks through those 6 things. But my list for tonight, I'm going to look at 3 things quickly. Why the existence of an infinite personal God best explains these 3 things. Number 1, reason and consciousness. We're going to see them. I've chosen these intentionally because these are the things that are often used against us. You Christians are so illogical. You don't uphold logic. And I'm going to argue that logic itself, the best explanation for the use and the existence of logic, is actually God. Secondly, moral values and obligation. That there are objective moral values. There are things that are objectively wrong. Torturing babies for fun is wrong. It's objectively wrong. It's not because, that's just your opinion. No, it's not my opinion. That's objectively wrong. And we'll talk more about that in our 3rd week. But God best explains the objectivity of moral values and obligation. And I want to argue thirdly, that God best explains science. And again, I'm taking these very intentionally because, well, you Christians you're anti-science. Well, what if science doesn't make any sense unless God exists? That'd be a powerful argument, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be sort of that jujitsu? You know, it's like you come at me with this or that, and then you go, whoa, I can't even do that unless God exists. Each of these topics could be its own session, right? Okay, so I've done some writing on these if you're interested in these. But the goal is to get the structure of the argument tonight. And we can fill in details as we go along, maybe over the next couple of weeks, particularly week 3. Reason and the laws of logic. Let's start with that. Reason and the laws of logic. Let's start with the laws of logic. Logic is fundamental to thought and reasoning, right? You need it. Anybody know what the sort of 3 fundamental laws of logic are? Let's get a little more technical. I'm always looking at this table because they got some good answers over here. Things like this. Yes. I'm sorry? Yeah, you got the law, what's it called, the law of what? You were so close and you got a great example of it. Thank you. The law of non-contradiction. Something can't, usually they talk about A. The first one is the law of identity. A equals A. I'm glad I'm not paying for this tonight because that was so simple, right? That's what I know what you're thinking. A is A. Something is the same thing. That's the fundamental law. There's the law of identity. The law of non-contradiction. Something can't be A and not A at the same time in the same relationship. I can't both be a father and a son in the same relationship. Now, I'm a father, I have sons and a daughter, and I'm a son to my father. Those are different relationships. But I can't say, I'm a father and also the son to this being. If I pick out my son. It's like, well, you're one or the other, right? We're going to guess by your age, you're the father of this. Law of non-contradiction. And then the law of excluded middle. Either A or non-A. It's not either A or B, because you can do that, right? Something could be A, red and round. It could be a round ball. But it can't be A, a ball, and not a ball. Right? So that's what those are saying. Fundamental laws of logic that we use. So let's reflect on those laws. These laws are not physical in nature. Like I said, you're never going to go find one laying around. Oh, there's the law of identity. Catch it quick. You know, don't lose it. Well, we can't think anymore. I think they're universal. They work everywhere. They work here. They work in Georgia. They work on Mars. They work in alternate universes, if those things exist. That's the claim. They're also invariant, or when I say unchanging. These are some pretty radical concepts, right? Immaterial, unchanging, invariant. The nature of these laws of logic don't make sense in a naturalistic, materialistic universe. All that exists is matter. And I'm using logic, which is immaterial. Well, how do you get this immaterial thing? And philosophers call